Hi everybody, this is SAAD. Today I continue with the reading of the papers from the Grievance studies experiment that recently uh, became known all over the world. Yesterday I read a bunch of titles and abstracts. Today I read the remaining ones. The last paper that I will read, I actually communicated with Pete Boghossian, one of the three people who participated on the project, because there were supposed to be 20 papers that were part of the project, but yet I had access to 21 papers. And so I asked him about the discrepancy, and apparently the last paper that I'll be reading for you is actually part of it's a revision of the first paper that I read in the previous SAAD TRUTH clip. Bottom line, the last paper that I'll be reading for you today is actually not a separate paper, but is a revised version of something that I had already covered in my previous clip. Just wanted to be perfectly accurate. All right, so here we go. So, hegemonic academic bullying, the ethics of Socal-style hoax papers on gender studies. For those of you who don't know the Socal hoax, you need to check it out. Socal, S-O-K-A-L, is a physicist at New York University who became famous for conducting the original hoax, if you'd like, in 1996. So you might want to check that paper out and the subsequent stuff that happened. Okay, so here's the abstract. In 1996, Alan Socal, a professor of physics at New York University, published an intentionally bogus article in the prestigious peer-reviewed postmodern journal Social Text. Okay, so I guess they're going over it. What is conspicuously absent from the scholarly literature is whether or not publishing bogus Socal-style hoax papers in peer-reviewed journals is unethical. This paper fills that gap. It argues that the ethics of hoax papers is contingent on the discipline. Specifically, it argues that hoaxes on unethical fields are morally justifiable and hoaxes on ethical fields are unjustifiable. To make this argument, first, it situates this discussion in the context of recent attacks on gender studies. Second, it explains why hoax papers must be understood within a larger moral context of that which facilitates hegemonic oppression and that which remediates it. Third, it examines two bodies of evidence, peer-reviewed journals and academic departments, that demonstrate gender studies is fundamentally oriented toward alleviating oppression and facilitating social justice activism. Okay, this seems like a reasonable paper. Next, this was published in Hypatia, which is, I guess, one of the premier journals that peddles this BS, a journal of feminist philosophy. The title of the paper is When the Joke is on You, a feminist perspective on how positionality influences satire. I do know one or two things about satire. Abstract. Humor is a powerful tool that achieves many social functions. Beyond improving group bonds, humor also routinely performs socio-political functions, including both upholding dominant power structures and subverting them. Following recent scholarship on epistemic injustices/oppression and the social function of humor, this article will argue that these effects depend upon the would-be humorist's positionality. By showing when parody, satire, irony generates Medina's concept of epistemic friction and when it cannot, Medina 2013, the two functions of humor are clarified as a tool of subversion that fosters social justice aims when coming from marginalized groups, and a tool of superiority disparagement, a shadow text, Bailey 2017, when used by privileged ones against social justice aims. Consequently, I make recommendations for those engaged in social justice pedagogy to take humor seriously regarding its dual functions and impacts within the classroom and popular culture and even within the academic canon. Okay, I need to start seeing some crazy stuff. This is sounding too reasonable. All right, here we go. Okay, this is another of those published papers, which then I guess was eventually retracted. I'm not sure if this one was or not. This is published in Sex Roles, which is actually a pretty respected journal. I'm quite aware of it. It usually looks at sex differences or, quote, gender differences from a social constructivist perspective. So the title of the paper is An Ethnography of Restaurant, Masculinity, themes of objectification, sexual conquest, male control, and masculine toughness in a sexually objectifying restaurant. The present study is based on a 2-year participation observer ethnography of a group of men in, quote, restaurant to characterize the unique masculinity features that environment evokes. Currently, whereas some research examines sexually objectifying restaurant environments regarding their impact upon women in those spaces, no known scholarly attention has been given to men and masculinities in these environments. Through thematic analysis of table dialogue, supplemented by brief unstructured interviews, I identify 4 major and 1 minor theme of, quote, restaurant masculinity, close quote, as distinctive to that environment. These include sexual objectification, sexual conquest, male control of women, masculine toughness, and, as a minor theme, rationalizations for why men frequent restaurants. Following recent trends in masculinities research, my study interprets the restaurant as a type of male preserve that erects a local pastiche hegemony in which these themes gain protected status. It also theorizes that the unique interactive environment of the restaurant between mostly male patrons and attractive female servers who provide heterosexual aesthetic labor to the patrons, primarily in the form of ersatz sexual availability, produces these masculinity features. Given their current rapid expansion and popularity within masculine subcultures, the restaurant therefore becomes an important site for critical masculinities research. Practice implications are discussed for management and counseling professionals who aim to improve outcomes in social and professional situations for both men and women. Okay. Next. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Okay, this I'm going to have to read without breaking down. Rubbing one out. Defining metasexual violence of objectification through non-consensual masturbation. Abstract. The psychological harms attendant to the sexual objectification of women are well documented throughout the theoretical and empirical literature, but to date, there is very little discussion on whether and when these harms and the routine behaviors that create them constitute a form of violence against women. By drawing upon empirical studies of psychological harms of objectification, especially through depersonalization, and exploring several veins of theoretical literature on non-physical forms of sexual violence, this article seeks to situate non-consensual male autoerotic fantasizing about women as a form of metasexual violence that depersonalizes her, injures her being on an affective level, contributes to consequent harms of objectification and rape culture, and can appropriate her identity for the purpose of male sexual gratification. It concludes that this commonplace male behavior is a site of poorly studied sexual violence against women that demands greater scholarly attention. Remember, kids, if you're masturbating, you're committing violence against women. All right, next. This actually was published in a journal, Journal of Poetic Therapy, Moon Meetings and the Meaning of Sisterhood, a poetic portrayal of lived feminist spirituality. Feminist spirituality is a center of sisterhood and feminist disruption that is often underappreciated within the scholarly literature. Hence, I use poetic inquiry combined with autoethnography to open a window into the real-world practice of feminist spirituality in a small sisterhood I'm fortunate to be a part of. The poems contained within chronicle my failing marriage, while the vignettes between them shed light upon the sisterhood that kept me strong as I coped with it. And this is from Carol Miller, PhD, Portland Ungendering Research Initiative. Right, next. Rebraiding Masculinity, Redefining the Struggle of Women Under the Domination of the Masculinity Trinity. For decades, feminist and masculinity scholarship has sought to parse the many forms of benevolent and harmful masculinity and to find ways to culturally encourage the former and diminish the latter. Masculinity's research has therefore examined and re-examined the various constructions, tropes, power dynamics, features, and dominances of various masculinities, and critical scholarship has deeply investigated the co-constituted problems of male privilege and patriarchy in tremendous detail. Masculinities have, by this process, been unwound and critically examined by feminist and gender scholarship into a stunning array of separate threads. This autoethnographic account chronicles my own reluctant feminist awakening while seeking to identify three essential strands of masculinity, the, quote, masculinity trinity, and identify their underlying similarities. It then, in brackets, close brackets, braids the many strands of critically examined masculinities to highlight their inherent similarity and thus expose and potentially disrupt the fundamentally problematic nature to masculinity itself. Good stuff. All right, next. This was published in a journal called Porn Studies. Agency as an Elephant Test for Feminist Porn. Impacts on male explicit and implicit associations about women in society by immersive pornographic consumption. Given the availability and consumption of pornography on the internet, questions of its influences on society are increasingly salient. Some pornographic content can be categorized by presenting, quote, female-friendly, close quote, and, quote, female-degrading, close quote, themes, which seem diametrically opposed. This study initially hypothesized female-friendly pornography improves implicit and explicit male attitudes about women in society, while female-degrading pornography damages them. It examines these hypotheses in part by tracking changes in outcomes of implicit association tests after immersive viewing of pornographic media in each category. Further mixed method analyses indicate these hypotheses are broadly supported but suboptimal for addressing important questions in critical porn research. Building on work by Fritz and Paul, 2017, the variable of female agency is shown to produce statistically significant semi-paradoxical results which challenge the assumptions underlying a facile categorization of pornography into female-friendly and female-degrading subtypes. Next, 3 more to go. The Progressive Stack, an intersectional feminist approach to pedagogy. The, quote, progressive stack, a heuristic that arose in progressive social movements, has recently gained traction as a pedagogical technique, although currently there is virtually no peer-reviewed scholarship surrounding its use in the classroom. This paper aims to establish an ethical infrastructure governing the progressive stack's adoption as a pedagogical technique while also theoretically engaging common objections. First, it explores recent scholarship on epistemic injustice, oppression, and exploitation, and its applicability to the educational environment. Second, it explains the progressive stack and how it can temporarily address and remediate injustices in the classroom. Third, it replies to objections for using the progressive stack by applying Robin DiAngelo's, quote, white fragility, and offers suggestions for conditions of solidarity through experiential reparations in the classroom setting. Finally, it argues that educators should engage these objections by means of critically compassionate intellectualism without recentering the needs of the privileged. Nice. I think this might be the one where, you can tie white kids to the whatever, to on change or something to that effect. I haven't read the paper, but I certainly have heard about this pedagogical progressive approach. All right, queering Plato. Plato's allegory of the cave as a queer theoretic emancipatory text on sexuality and gender. This article queers Plato by focusing upon Plato's allegory of the cave as a fitting figurative account consistent with the theoretical and practical aims of queer theory and its application. To queer Plato, it applies thematic elements in Judith Butler's work. If you're wondering why I just laughed, because you've got to read Judith Butler's work. I think she won an award for the most ridiculous sentence, ever published, or certainly published within some time frame. So let me start the sentence again. To queer Plato, it applies thematic elements in Judith Butler's work, like, quote, the heterosexuality matrix and the emphasis on gender as being anti-essentialist, to show how Socrates' view of the forms can be understood as a precursor and a theoretical underpinning to much of Butler's scholarship. Ultimately, by queering Plato, I argue that the works of these two thinkers not only seamlessly comport with one another, but that taken in tandem they can provide a queer theoretical glimpse of what it means to escape the, quote, cave by transcending binaries. This is just fantastic. It truly is fantastic. And then finally, this is the paper that I told you I think this is the revised version of the first paper that I had read in the previous SAAD TRUTH clip. So it is Masculinity and the Others Within, a schizoethnographic approach to autoethnography. I present the following as a schizoethnographical account, which then becomes a method of qualitative inquiry that engages multiplicities within the subject, who is typically understood in autoethnographies as being unitary. This schizoethnography explores my own otherness within and how my multiplicities of self led me to challenge my own masculinity through experimentation and direct engagement with transformational autoethnographic research and feminist literature. By direct engagement with my own schizoid personality disorder, I thereby interrogate parts of myself as though they are unique others within a single self and aim to expand autoethnographic inquiry in the process. I think I now have schizophrenia because I read that abstract. There you have it, folks. These constitute, so the last clip and this clip constitute a reading of the papers that were included in the Grievance studies experiment, and also the one that I had read previously, the dog park promoting rape culture. There you have it. If you don't stand up, if you don't challenge the BS that is being peddled at our universities, then don't complain when not only are you left with huge debts because your children are taking intersectional transgender feminist glaciology as a course at Oberlin College, but that their minds are being parasitized into useless mush. Get engaged. There are many, many ways by which people can push back against this anti-reason, anti-science, anti-logic, faux profundity, pure gibberish bullshit. On a nice note, today is Canadian Thanksgiving. In Canada, we celebrate the holiday much earlier than the United States. So much to be thankful for. Life is beautiful. Of course, there are challenges, but enjoy every moment. Get out there and live it to the fullest. Have a good day, everybody. Cheers.